This is Jenny Levine. She's a nutritionist and a GAPS practitioner. Dietitian, okay. And you run a private nutrition clinic, you formerly worked at Astrid Lindgren's Children's Hospital with elimination diets for allergic children. Long experience with food handling, food hygiene, and nutritional planning. This seems to be the seat where we put the food people.
Yes.
Yeah. Johanna, Johanna Brull-Nilsson. Yeah. Yes? That's right. Okay. Is a psychologist and specialist in clinical psychology. She works at a psychiatric clinic. She's also active as a supervisor and educator with psychotraumatology and trauma-oriented psychotherapeutic treatment. Welcome. And Marianne Cederblad, yeah, is a professor emerita in child and adolescent psychiatry. She's participated in introducing family therapy in Sweden. She's researched about psychic disorders amongst children and adolescents in different countries, as well as the effect of family therapy and mental disorders in early years. Welcome. Lars Joelsson. Yes. Okay. Is a specialist in psychiatry and a psychotherapist, specializing in common psychiatry. Is that
yes.
right? Okay. As well as child psychiatry, adolescent psychiatry. President for Swedish Association for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, and he investigates and treats children and adolescents with ADHD on a daily basis.
Yes.
Okay. Katie Hagman. Yes. Okay. Psychologist and psychotherapist. She's with a child and adolescent psychiatry since 2003. Katie has, together with Lotta, who was on the last panel, investigated how parents of children diagnosed with ADHD view ADHD. So this is good. We'll get some of the kids' point of view here. And theories of how they influence their wishes regarding treatments. Last but not least, we have Suzanne Wolms.
That's pretty good.
Yeah? But how do you really say it?
Volmersjö.
That wasn't pretty good, actually. I did try. Okay. Suzanne is an educator and teacher at the College of Physical Education and has studied cognitive neuroscience in combination with CBT, and has also studied MNRI as neurosensory motor
reflex integration.
Thank you. Yeah. Reflex integration specialist, educates in pedagogy, physiology, and behavioral sciences. So, welcome, panel. And for this next round, we have the easy peasy task of taking all of this complexity and systemic overlapping of, I mean, seriously, it feels kind of impossible sometimes. How do we get at this problem through all these different systems across all these barriers and boundaries? And yet, at the same time, at the end of the day, at the beginning of the day, and all day long, what we're actually talking about is real people, real kids that really need help. So how can we begin to, what do we do? What do we do about this?
Now, I'm an optimistic person and try to see what's good things, what's happened in Sweden. And now it's falling on. Yeah. I think I would refer to three very important groups. The first is the National Board of Health and Welfare, the Socialstyrelsen. I think they have a lot of eye on this medication. And the latest statistic from this board is boys 10 to 17 years, they have 5.2%. And girls 2.2%. if you look at the whole country. It's not about 10, 12. But some, and the prognosis that the boys may be at 6.2 and the girls 3.0. If it's what you call it, continue like this. And then it's this government group for medication and ethics group. They come with a very strong report now. They worried about this degree increase in the medication, and it's a lot of variation in Sweden. And also that reports that the school don't do anything about if you don't get any diagnosis. So this is a government group, and then the third is our own association. We have a big conference now. That's not working. That's the microphone. Where is the microphone?
This one's for the camera, and this one's for your volume.
Oh, I thought that was, yes. Okay. Yeah. It's a complicated system. Yes. Where was I? Yeah, association. We have a big conference, 460 person of different professionals come. And then we have we invited one of these criticals, Ingmar Engström, professor, was writing this report from SMIR. And then we have a very good discussion. So I think our association also want to discuss this matter, so you don't get this increase, but you also we will also not have this variation, you know. And with this guidelines, and Ellen think that I was the most important person here. That's why here. And it's not you have to read it carefully, because here is absolutely that you have stepwise, and that you have to a lot of things, other things, before you start medication. So I think you can all write and give your opinion about this. And it's taken 2 years to write this, and every member of the association and the academy in Sweden have write opinions about it, and we have rewrite it several times. So I just want to see, I wanted to be more, what do you call it, the discussion to be more realistic or hopeful.
I mean, I guess the first place to start then is what do we mean by realistic treatment? What does that really entail? Yeah. And I open that up to the panel of what are some of your reflections of what does it mean to be realistic?
Well, I don't really have the answer, but I think I have some realistic answers on what you could do. It's been an interesting day, and all you know that it's a lot of different systems are interacting with each other. And Cecilia, that was sitting here before, the teacher, she said, look at the children, they have the answers. And children moves, right? And usually you do what you need more. So a lot of the kids that should not be diagnosed, if I use Alan's words, the ones that are in the gray area, maybe they just need to move more. And that's been my field and my interest to look at that for a long time. And some of them need to everybody needs to move. I get tired too, sitting down, but some of them needs a little bit of extra movement. And we look at the pattern, the primary patterns for giving you stability and feeling safe in your body. So one of the first things I looked at was actually working at a daycare center in the US. My boss brought me in the first day and she said, I hear the children call you Suzanne. I said, yeah, well, we want them to call you by your last name. And she said, what's your last name? And then I said, Volmersjö. And she said, they can call you Suzanne. Anyway, I looked at the children, and I had just finished my physical education teacher diploma, and I was upset that they got there by car to the daycare center, and I was upset about the food that they were eating in their lunch box. But I was also upset that they didn't move, and I said, don't they get physical education? And she said, well, 10 minutes a day they get to run outside. but we have really high fences so no one is kidnapped while they do it. So you have to be outside when they run. So I went outside and I looked at them and I said, they're not running like the Swedish kids. This is in the 80s. Now the Swedish kids are running like the Americans. Anyway, what happened was that I went back to my university and we did a study. My psychology professor was also the one teaching me about motor development. So we actually saw that some of the children were actually very coordinated. And we asked them, what do you think about yourself? And usually they said, I love myself. And then we looked at some of the children that were not coordinated. We call them spider kids, like 8 arms and legs kind of thing. And they would not answer the question because they were busy staying balanced, not falling down. So then it's hard to use your perception. And maybe those are the kids that we can help with motor learning, going back to the normal patterns. And that's one of the realistic things I think we can all work with. So I'm happy to answer questions about that.
I see nowadays it's a lot of children coming to our clinics is coming from school because they can't manage the school. That's several years ago there was hyperactive, disturbed, aggressive. But today a lot of children, they don't manage the school. They could be not hyperactive, not impulsive, but they can't focus, they can't concentrate, they can't do the tasks, and they don't get this grade. And that's a big problem. And I'm 4 days every term I'm in the school. I meet the child, the parents, the teacher, and the headmaster. He's very important, or she, because she has the money, and his money, and the nurse. And in the beginning, I was very afraid. I think I'm the expert. They want to ask me what to do. So what should I say? So I was very afraid about. But it's always every time the same things happen. There's the parents, the child, and the teacher talks and come in with a solution and try to get a solution. And I'm a headmaster just listening. So I think there's a very power in that, you know. So, but sometimes I like you don't say so much, Camilla, but I think there's a lot that you can do in the school, small things. I met a boy here another day, and he said, I can't get it. When the teacher says once, I don't get it. I don't understand what he said. He had to say it several times. And the teacher, when the answer, do you ask the teacher after? I always say to children, ask the teacher after. Yeah, but I did it. But then she said, you had to listen the first time. You had to listen the first time. So that's a very important, if the diagnosis, because you said, I have a problem here. I try to listen, but I don't get it. It's quite another thing that I don't want to listen. I think that's very important that the teacher know that this boy have a problem with that. And then you call it ADHD or what you call it. But it's very important that you could focus on that this boy has a problem. It's not that he don't want to. So you can, very small things can do a lot of things for the children.
Now, I would like to go back to what you started with about reductionism, because I have been a child psychiatrist for a very long time. And in the 1970s, we had this biopsychosocial model that you talked about, and which is still, I think, the official model for child psychiatry in Sweden. But at that time, we made a mistake, I think, because we crossed out bio and looked most at psychological and social factors. And we looked at the system around the child and the child as a part of the system. But we forgot the fact that the child was also a person who had his own problems, because we saw the child as a subsystem of a larger system, the family. So we made a mistake. But now, I think time has very quickly shifted to crossing out psycho and social and focus only on biology, the bio and the biopsychosocial model, which is equally simplistic. And I think today we are discussing how to get back to this more broader view at the child in his systems, in the family, in the system of school, the system of society. And I think that is the only way to go, to bring back a synthesis of these three parts. And maybe I'm reading this homepage of the Swedish Association of Mental Health and their recommendations as the devil reads the Bible. But I can't see this, that you say, that you are looking equally at all these different systems. I see that it's very much focused on the biological system and of the child, and that the other systems I've seen more as helpers of the child, not as part of an interaction where everyone is a part of the outcome. And if medication was as, for this disorder was as good as penicillin when it came, I could understand this quick shift. But we all know that there is no science that says that long-term use of these stimulants has a dramatic effect on the constellation of symptoms that we call ADHD. So I don't see the point of why our profession has shifted to this very reductionist view of ADHD.
I think Elisabeth might add that actually that initial love affair with penicillin might have been an overblown affection as well, as we are coming now into an era in which the other ecologies of the microbacteria are becoming not only immune to antibiotics, but also that that we're learning more about how to use biotics to work with biotics. So science changes, research changes. And I think that it's really valuable to look at this process as an arc, a story of how we have come to understand and continue to deepen our understanding around how this behavior is part of social, cultural, and biological interrelationship.
I work in adult psychiatry, and people that need help from psychiatry have usually a very, very complex picture, complex symptomatology. And you can interpret those symptoms into many different kinds of diagnoses. And therefore, I find that it's very, very necessary, and I agree with you, Ellen Francis, you need to do a stepwise, very thoroughly assessment with everybody that comes at first. And also to do a screening of life events, because childhood trauma is very common among people that search help in psychiatry. And they have affect dysregulation, they can have attachment disorder, it can be a disorganized disorder, attachment disorder, and impulsive behavior, self-destructive behavior, and so on. And if you find trauma in the screening, then they need to have trauma-focused treatment before you can go further and investigate comorbidity. Because you cannot really put that hypothesis from the beginning, because the symptomatology is so similar between trauma-related disorders and ADHD. So that is a stepwise suggestion. And I wonder why this is not done already everywhere. And I've been thinking about it a lot, that there is a kind of avoidance in society to really see what people have gone through. And avoidance to hear what children have experienced. You really need to hear this, and to be able to hear it, and to be able to give them treatment for it. It's not only the refugees that come to our country, it's our own population as well, what is happening into our families.
Well, I'd like to address what Johan Sundelin addressed earlier about feeling stuck. And I think me and Lotta, we wrote a thesis about ideas about how to work and how to approach these questions with families and with children with ADHD. And when we talk about this with people who work with this and people we know how they work and we know what it looks like in their clinics, they say, oh, that's how we work like that. But we know they don't. And that's where you get stuck, I think, very often, that there's something happening in the communication where, like you would say, we see this stepwise in the guidelines, I don't see it, and so it becomes this we just have different pictures and they collide, and where do we go from that? For myself, I've been thinking more and more, well, I'm trained, I've done my education, I know my scientific ground, and I just stick to that. I just stick to that, and I can go on, and I know what to do. So I really would like us to talk about that, how to go on, because I think we can do so much for these children. And what I think we really need to do, and what we've done in the area where I work, is to very much engage schools, to create a nice environment for the children where they can express themselves and we can catch up on what's going on with them, what's happening, why does these things happen to them that makes all this fuss. And then the next step is to help them with that in school. And then if things doesn't work out, they can come to us. But then they sort it so much out in school that there's a good relation between the school and the parents. You don't end up in this bringing the child to BUP to get the school to do something, because the school is already doing all the things they need to do. So you get a totally different process than the process you see today. And I think there are many, many reasons that go beyond political reasons, all kinds of reasons for this development. But I really think we have a really good chance of stopping it and doing something good about it. I see no problems with that.
Do you think that the schools can handle that?
Yes.
I mean, I guess my question comes from a sort of a sympathy for the education system as well, which is perpetually underfunded and understaffed. And I know that there is an increasing degree of strategy around, what we call teaching to the test, but that the curricula that is getting implemented, it has less and less room in it for individual people to have individual forms of intelligence and skill and aptitudes. So I guess I would really love to support the educational system to be able to respond to that complexity in the individual kids with more care, more flexibility, really. But I don't know about the Swedish school system enough to know what to really make of that. I did speak at a session in Oxford recently on ecological education. And what they considered to be ecological education was a really strict curriculum about reduce, reuse, recycle, and absolutely nothing about how ecologies work. And the person who gave a big presentation there was me talking about systems, like I did a little while ago. And then there was another woman who was from this very prestigious London university, and she'd done all this research and been given millions of pounds for her research. And she provided an hour-long PowerPoint presentation on where in the brain adolescent risk behavior was located. I can tell you that in that room of Oxford people, and largely the people that were there were people who were designing the curricula. Sanoma, and there's several companies that work with this. International conglomerates, not so indifferent from big pharma is the big education people. They were very interested in her presentation and not very interested in mine. because it was so doable. If there's a spot in the brain where adolescent risk behavior is located, we can address that. We know what to do. We can develop things to turn that spot off or to deal with that. But if we start talking about how the child is part of these larger systems, it becomes much more expensive and difficult and requires a lot more flexibility to do that. Now, I think that all of us have had the experience in school where no matter what dogma the school portended, a great teacher is a great teacher, right? You know when someone sees you, no matter whether they're Waldorf or they're Montessori or they're Reggio Emilia or they're Standard Ed or they're, you know, super college prep, a good teacher is a good teacher. So I guess, you know, I think part of what we're talking about too is how do we better prepare everyone who's interacting with kids to be able to see them? Like you were talking about the Hippocratic quote of, you know, let the individual, the relationship between the individual and the diagnosis. So not to find the individual in the diagnosis, but vice versa. Is that correct? So, hold on. You haven't spoken yet. Do you have anything to add right away, Jenny?
My focus is food quality. So it's also kind of optimistic future, I'm hoping at least, because there is a trend now that we want to go into more, for example, organic foods, and there is a lot of focus on food quality. But I would like to give some credit to Alan for saying I'm not an expert in diet, and I don't have that expertise, because there is a lot of confusion going on, and I am an expert. So I would love to talk as an expert. And to make you understand what it's like to be an expert in nutrition today, I would like to start with a quote. It's a Jimi Hendrix quote. And it's, there's so much confusion, I can't get no relief. So, and that's where I am. So, one starting point would be to have dietitians in every BUP, for example. So that's one of the solutions. So when the parents come there, they can go and see a dietitian, and they can ask their questions. Because what is happening now is that the parents are excluding one thing here and another thing there, and there is no evaluation of what they are excluding, including, and this is what the dietitian would do if we were allowed to go to work at the BUP. But I have been trying to contact different BUP-mottagningar, and I've had a reply from one. So, we have one. You have one? Oh, great. Where are you working? Oh. So in Stockholm, the healthcare system is organized at least in that way that the parents don't see a dietitian of the children.
Yeah, it's been a lot of talk about different systems and that we're part of the system. And I'm thinking that every person has their own system also, and it would be nice to be able to teach every system to be self-regulated. So if you're in different systems, your own system should be able to say what you need. And I think that's a risk of giving it pills, that you lose your own self-regulation capability. So, and also, Jenny, it would be nice, I think, if we all could cooperate with our different knowledges. So not only a dietist, maybe also someone that knows movement and movement development and sensory motor abilities to help each other to make each system more and better self-regulated. So.
Let's see. Well, I am optimistic because I meet more and more teachers that say, I don't need a diagnosis to teach this child. I teach this child from this child's needs, so this child can reach the goals of the school. I meet more and more parents that say, I don't need a diagnosis to take care of my child. I need some help how to give my child the best support for development, but I don't need to know the diagnosis. So what I think actually it's a misunderstanding that it's easier to have a diagnosis, it's easier to make an assessment, to take pills and so on. I think a lot of people would find it much more easier if you would just say, oh, I have a problem, and I start working with it immediately. Like in school, the thing we're using now is Ross Green's Allsupa. He's got a model that's really nice because it engages the child. You make the child engaged in the process. And you talk of lagging skills, and you try to help the child to develop these lagging skills. So if the school gets this, if the school can do this, they feel very happy because they can start working immediately. They don't have to send the child somewhere else for someone else to say something and then send it back, and you start losing time. And you lose also the sense of empowerment that you can do something. So I think it's a misunderstanding that what we see now is some easy way. I think it's a really hard way. I think there are a lot more easier ways that we could choose if we want to. Yeah, that's all.
Well, I agree with you.
Oh.
Yes, because I think that was good to say. Because I also see that the school now they do more before you get diagnosed. And Ross Green, he's a very big man in the school nowadays. I think that, and he was on our congress, Bob Congress. We have Ross Green as the keynote speaker last year in Linköping. Yeah. So I think that's very nice and very helpful. But well, and I have but still, you have some children don't manage. You can't manage with that way. So, why I describe medicine when I was sitting here and wonder why I did it. Why do I do it? And the answer is very simple. I want to give the best help I can get the children. Yes. Because that's the best help you can get when they come. And sometimes you see like that, you know. It's a quite different children. It's very happy children. I always talk to the children alone when I get the assessment after I get medication. So when I come to a doctor, I want the best medicine. I want the best help. That's what I try to do. So that's the problem if there's too many. You have to give the right children the right help, and that's also medication.
But I was just going to say, as a sort of a practical, where do we go from here sort of statement, you know, there's a lot of incredible people in this room. And to begin to develop some sort of a committee that can produce a more diverse treatment that integrates physical education and diet and the criteria and guidelines that you're talking about, Lars, in addition to looking at trauma and looking at culture and looking at how all of this fits into the larger questions of our culture and our times and patterns of addiction that are facing our future. So I think that there's room here for us to actually be active in this process and not sit around and wait for someone else to do it for us.
The fact that individual difference is wonderful helps me cherish them at the moment when I want to spank them. And I think it's important to get parents to realize the wonder in the child, not just the problem, to realize the bright side in the fact they don't have some boring little kid who just sits around, you know, solving mathematics problems. They have an exciting child that brings adventure into their lives. Reframing stuff.
I'm a special care teacher in Finland, and we've been talking here about communication as the last alternative and what we teachers can do for the kids. I've been working at Bateson with kids and vision, and of course not with whether they should have glasses or not, because that's not my area, but how they, a bit what you talked about, how they look at things, how they see their surroundings, and how they copy patterns and stuff like that. I can see a lot of times that they do get so much more concentrations once they get the vision working in a better way. And now my question is to, I'm looking at you, Kathy, you were a psychologist, right? And everyone else here, you are testing these kids, because at least in Finland we do these tests, or not we, but the psychologists do the testings in gestalting, what's that in English? But yeah, just how they copy and how they see and how they look at their surroundings, and how much, then afterwards when you have your tests done, then how much credit do you give these kind of tests, and yeah, what do they say to you?
So it's a really big question, I think. As maybe you know, there's been an SPU report, saying that a lot of the psychological testing we do for assessing ADHD is actually not valid. It's not evidence-based, and so what you do in the process is that you have to bring in a lot of descriptions from school, parents, you have to see the interaction, and you do some testing, but very often the testing doesn't say so very much. It doesn't really provide you with as much information as I think most people think that we get with. I think a lot of people would think that we get so much information with these tests. The truth is, it's not very much information we get. Very often the information we get is more of a qualitative sort, that you would see how the child interacts in the situation, how the child deals with the test material, and you see impulsiveness and how long they can stay focused and so on. But really that's more what you see. It's not really, you don't come out with figures or numbers or something like that. And what you're saying about this visual aspect, this is new to me, so I'm sorry, I can't say anything wise about that.
I think you speak about the different kind of testing. I think you refer as lives, and you were talking about these questionnaires where if the person has ADHD.
No, I'm talking about the Vice and Whisk, but also one called EVA that is frequently used.
Those tests, they do say a lot of the person. At first, it excludes things that you want to know if they have learning disabilities or something like that. That explains the problem the kid has. That's the main reason to do this test. And then they say something about executive function, but when you should translate these findings to something you should do with the kids, that's the problem.
Well, yes, they can be absolutely used for excluding things, but when it comes to ADHD diagnostic, you have to rely more on descriptions than on the actually the testing.
I would only like to say thank you so much for being here with us, and it's been a wonderful day, very interesting. And I wonder, have you experienced some kind of punishment or repression because you're so outspoken about this? Because you threatened the drug companies actually with what you're saying.
I'm not important enough for them to worry about it. We joked that if I am struck by lightning, we know it's probably a drug company. Drug companies are so remarkably powerful that they don't particularly worry about a few people who criticize them, because they know that they can buy the people who really count, and that's the politicians in Washington. They control the regulator. They're supposed to be controlled by our Food and Drug Administration. It's like the fox guarding the hen house. They are so powerful that they actually, it used to be that only 1/3 of drugs were approved. Now almost all drugs are approved. Even really silly drugs, like female Viagra was approved. even though the scientists said it was a stupid idea to approve the drug. It improves sexual interest very little. It has bad side effects. The FDA went over their heads and approved it. So that at this point, a few critics don't really bother them very much because they're able to raise their prices, they're able to bring mediocre new drugs to market without any opposition. This presidential campaign has been encouraging in this regard, if no other. And it certainly has been discouraging in many ways. But the good thing about this presidential campaign was that 3 of the major candidates said that the drug company pricing is ridiculous. Hillary Clinton did, Bernie Sanders did the most, and even Donald Trump. One bright light in an otherwise very dark night. Even he said that the drug companies are charging ridiculous amounts. So that personally, I can say whatever I want. What is anyone going to do to me? Yeah. Many of you are in a more vulnerable position and have received, it's easy for me to say this because I leave in a few days. Many of you live here and have to worry more about the reputational aspects of having people spread ugly, stupid rumors about you to defend their ugly, stupid ideas. And it's understandable that there'd be a silence. But I think the more people speak up, there really is an emperor's no close. And people, the best friends are newspaper people and media people. Then occasionally you'll come across someone who's unfair and will, treat you badly. But by and large, the more you grant interviews to newspaper people and educate them to the issues, they become the mouthpiece to the public. And without doing that, you're letting your opponents control the floor. And then they win and you lose.
So I will go back to what Tomas said about the political correctness in Sweden. All say that ADHD is neuropsychiatric and it's a great genetic, but it's not true. But all the authorities in Sweden say that, and the situation is even worse because social board says now that we should give medicine to almost all children, and the Läkemedelsverket, medical board, I think it's called, 2009 they said that medicine is one part they can use when other measures have to work. Now they say medicine is one part in a multi-modal treatment where also psychosocial things are done. And the United Nations Committee for Child's Rights has criticized Sweden that we have too much ADHD diagnosis and too much medicine, and they even urged the state party to start a committee which is an independent committee, but no authority take that. Not even the child, the Barnombudsmannen, the ombudsman for the children. He lies and said there is, you must have more girls to diagnosis, when UN committee says it's too much diagnosis. So I think the situation in Sweden is very dark, and it's interesting to hear you to say that our view is ridiculous. I think it is, but it's not very easy to stop the authorities. And I also say to Lars that your guidance is not very stepwise. It's perhaps a step in the right direction, but not stepwise enough. So I think we're in a bad situation, but this could be the spark to start to clarify.
Let me just comment to that. I think that it's never possible to write a guideline for any given disorder that is generic to everyone who would meet the criteria for that disorder, because there is such an enormous difference depending on severity and duration. So if the guideline were meant to be dealing with the very small percentage of people, maybe 2 or 3%, maybe less, who have the most extreme form of presentation of ADHD, who've started very young, have persistent, pervasive symptoms, are having terrible impairment in every aspect of their life. It's dense, it's severe, it's not going away, other things aren't working. If the guideline were dealing with that very small percentage of the population, including medication as part of the treatment, as a necessary part, makes sense. When the rates of ADHD start climbing, in the US ridiculously to 15%, here less ridiculously to maybe 5 or 6% in boys, the more you're dealing with the gray area milder cases, the less likely it is that medication will be needed the more likely that the risk-benefit ratio starts tipping in the direction of risk being greater than benefit, and much more likely that other interventions will be sufficient. One of those interventions being time, watchful waiting and normalization and counseling and parent training, that all of these will be sufficient. And for the milder cases, it doesn't make sense to be recommending medicine for everyone. This is true across all psychiatric disorders, with the possible exception of schizophrenia and severe recurrent bipolar disorder, where medication may almost always be necessary. But for virtually every psychiatric disorder, psychotherapy is a very good first line for mild to moderate cases, with medication being a second line if the first line doesn't do enough. And I think we shouldn't see the ADHD as being at all a homogeneous phenomenon where one guideline fits all presentations. And for the milder cases, it should always be medication last resort rather than first instinct.
My name is Johan. I'm basically a scientist, research worker. I have 65 years of that kind of work. I've also been in clinician as a part of my work as a scientist. I have to be a little bit critical about a few things that you are mentioning about the expert. And my professor was a Nobel Prize winner. He always told his young people, when you have found out something that is very interesting and stimulating, it is your duty to prove you are wrong. If you are not able to prove it, you may be right. And I think this is also something that is applied to this kind of research. The second one is Professor Richard Feynman, who is also a Nobel winner. He had a very good expression that I tell very often to a younger colleague. If you meet an expert, it is your duty to be critical. Thank you.
I'd like to answer, because I wanted to reply. If these guidelines, if you read that properly, we have the indication. We should say that you have to read this in the patient. Fine. Yeah, okay. That you have given the right psychopedagogic instruction for both verbal and writing down it. You have the keeping education for the parents, and you have care of plan of care for the child and the parents, and they will be very active in that. And that you have cooperate with school, and then the pharmacology. So I think this, you can read this like the devil read the Bible. That's my answer. So I think we have to be careful what we say.
That's what social society says, and if I know my colleagues, when they read that, they see that we should take say the symptoms for ADHD that are in many diseases, and they miss that too much. Perhaps I said this is a step in the right direction, but not too much, not enough.
And it's a step in the direction. Yeah. I think there needs to be more discussion, obviously, if there's this concern.
But it's of course, the guidelines is just fresh, what do you call it, fresh water, I don't know what's in English, but you have to decide, next year we have to rewrite it, and then we have, it's in the guidelines, we have to reverse it and rewrite it.
And I think that's the opportunity that the audience should be eager to take, to make comments, to be part of the process. And the more you ask to be part of the process, the more he'll let you in. He's a reasonable, very reasonable man. Going back to the expert thing, I have a friend, a very distinguished biological psychiatrist, and he's semi-retired now, but the most active part of his work is going over his own papers and proving how they were wrong.
I'm happy enough to claim that most of my papers have also are correct.
Are correct? anyone who is very sure of them, it turns out that probably 85% of the scientific literature doesn't replicate. And a recent study they tried to replicate 100 different experiments in psychology, and only about a third replicated. That we shouldn't, any of us, feel very sure that the way we see things is the final way. There's a great statement in the Talmud. We don't see things as they are, we see things as we are. So we all have biases. It's part of human nature to have limitations in outlook. But the advantage of having crowdsourcing, of having many different people with different orientations, is you're more likely to approximate reality the more different views of it you have expressed. The narrower the view of reality, the more the censorship of deviant views, the more deviant the views will be.
I've been working in the school since 1967 with all kinds of classes and special age teachers since 84. I have used all the pedagogical methodologies with needed, but not until recently, that is the last 15 years, I've been able to help children with ADHD. And I can confirm the speaker that said there are only 2% of the ADHD diagnosed that are real ADHD. Because through sensomotoric training, I have helped a lot of children to stop medication, to be a normal student in the classroom. And they have a lot of success in their lives, not to be labeled ADHD. So if there was true that this was genetic, my work would have been impossible. So I think still that a lot of the ADHD diagnosed are depending on other things than genetics.
I guess I just wanted to also reiterate the importance of looking at how these children that are getting treated exist in larger contexts over time. In the process of thinking about what kind of treatment to give them, we're also teaching them what treatment is. And we're creating a culture in which there are ideas of what it means to receive and be part of treatment. And that is not only about the child or the school. That's about the future of them being able to have a conversation like we're having right now. What can they say 10 years from now? What world are they coming into? I really want to bring that in because in this beautiful room full of health practitioners and people who work with children, there's also the larger anthropological aspect of this, which is that our understanding of what our world is and how things work is at the center of this. While we're talking about ADHD in 1 minute, we can easily be talking about a number of other conditions and the way that they get treated. So part, I think, of the resistance that we have in Sweden, I've only been here a couple of years, it's not really mine, but is a cultural resistance. It's resistance at another level. It's resistance that has to do with what happens when you question authority. So does that really have anything to do with ADHD? I don't know. Probably not. It's probably a cultural situation. And in that sense, I think it's also really important to look at how the culture of these kids becomes a socialized culture, becomes a party culture. Where this is going in the timeline is really important to keep in mind. So as we're coming up with treatments and thinking about possibilities, to keep in mind the long-term culture of treatment.
Yeah, and especially when kids are now being given candy. The ADHD is in candy. What are you teaching them? You're teaching them how much fun it is to take pills, that there's a pill for every problem, that if you're having trouble in a situation, take a pill, that we've become a pill-happy society, and that reduces the individual and societal resilience to deal with problems as they present themselves and find solutions that aren't exclusively pill-based.
So, there won't be room for any more comments and questions, so I would just ask you to sum
Wrap it up?
Yeah, wrap it up, please.
First of all, things are a lot better here than almost anywhere else. Your rates are low compared to many other countries. So you're experiencing the problem of increasing rates. You're experiencing a disparity from province to province. But overall, you're nowhere near the absurd rates that we have in the United States. That's a tremendous plus. Part of this is because of the wisdom of the system that doesn't allow every doctor to prescribe the medication. If every doctor could prescribe the medication, your rates would probably instantly jump up and be very close to ours. But this is the filter that prevents the ridiculous rates of ADHD that we have. And anything that changes that filter will be very dangerous. I'm surprised that drug companies haven't figured out a way to get that stopped. I think that you have a large number of clinicians of varied disciplines. You have a multimodal approach in this room, at least, that's dramatic. You have much better resources, smaller class size than almost anywhere else. And you have probably overall much less chaotic classrooms than we would have in the United States. So you don't have the teachers who are constantly pressing. The teachers speaking here, none of them are saying, I can't control my class, I need more medicine. Whereas in the United States,
it's very, very, it's what they do in our schools.
But some teachers do that.
They're pressing for it.
So there are some teachers very much pressing for the medicine. That's the norm in the United States. The classes are too large, the problems in the class are too diverse, and the teachers are a very important instigator, and they've been also advertised to. They're a very important instigator of excessive diagnosis. I'm hoping it's less here. You have the tremendous advantage of not having direct-to-consumer advertising. So just imagine what it would be like if you would be seeing TV commercials that would show a kid who looks very much like your kid, saying more or less he can do a lot better in school if he's only took a pill. The ADHD is under-recognized. It's a well-established disease. It hasn't been diagnosed nearly enough. There's a great unmet need. And since it's a chemical imbalance, we have a chemical in a pill form that can solve the problem. But that's the kind of advertising for ADHD that was pervasive. And it's still, although it's much less, ADHD is not popular on TV now, it's still very much on the internet. And the consumer organizations are themselves marketeers for the drug companies. Your drug companies may be powerful, but they're nothing like ours. And the profits are small compared to the profits in the US. So they devote all of their best talent to convincing every kid in the world that they have ADHD and they should be on the pill, or every parent. So you're in much better shape. You have problems, though. I think it's a real problem that people can't speak up without being called names. But that's unheard of. Except in Australia, I've never encountered it before. And so somehow or other, there has to be the sense that, and this should have been, this is a social democracy, right? You shouldn't be afraid to give an opinion, especially when the opinion is right. Certainly shouldn't be personal attacks when someone disagrees with the prevailing point of view. But that's not the way to do things. It means that the power has been too concentrated in too few hands, and that has to change. I think that the refugee issue, if it's not playing itself out now, will have to play itself out. The social system is geared in its funding for a certain population and certain social needs. And the generosity, the unprecedented generosity of the country will, I think, necessarily have the impact, and she and I were arguing this last year, that she's very generous and feels that the whole world should be allowed in because they need it. I'm more pragmatic and feel that if you overflow the system, you'll start having even more right-wing parties, even maybe invent a Donald Trump, although that's hard to believe, and that the social system will be stretched very much if it's stretched too far. And that what you can do now may be diluted very much if the needs exceed the resources in the future. So I would tend to be a little bit more protective of what you have rather than feel that you can meet all of the world's problems. Every time you take someone in, there's a child born who replaces them. It's just a fact of life. And you can't solve all of the world's problems in Sweden. It's wonderful being generous, but you also have to be protective of what you can offer. I think that it sounds like from the discussion that there could be more integration of the different professions. And that it's a wonderful, the title of your group is?
Integrativ Medicin.
It's right in the title of the group, Integrative Medicine. That and even broader would be the integrative caring professions. And that to the degree that the different professions could meet more regularly, not in large groups like this, but representatives of each, and hash out where the differences are, and I'm sure they'd be a lot less significant than would be expected before the discussions began, that would be helpful. It's also helpful to meet with people from other countries. In Iceland, they could certainly use your contact. And you probably could use theirs as well. But the Nordic countries have enough similarity of local differences. It would make sense to see these efforts as not being restricted. And I know that in other medical specialties, there's much more cooperation across the different countries. I think in urology especially, to develop guidelines that wouldn't be local to one area, that would be more general. And again, the more general the guideline, the more it will make sense. That any guideline made by one small group will make less sense than a guideline that has more input, more countries, more professions. I think that, again, the media exposure here is wonderful. There were 15 journalists here, I think. And that's part of being able to change this, this rule of silence and secrecy that has been a problem up till now. But the more that you get to parents through the media, that you get to teachers through the media, and that you offer different solutions, the less do the drug companies control the dialogue. The David and Goliath battle usually goes to Goliath. But I'm going to tell you a story, one that always moves me almost to tears. In the 1980 Olympics, Russia was the favorite hockey team, Soviet Union then. Soviet Union had an unbelievable hockey team. They had won the world championship the previous 7 years consecutively. Most of the players were 27, 28 years old in the prime of their life. And they had the world's best coach. He recently died. He died about 2 years ago. They had the world's best hockey coach, the world's best hockey players. The American team had a good coach. His name was Herb Brooks, but he was a college coach. At the beginning of the Olympics, an unknown college coach from, I think he was then the coach in Minnesota, in a small school in Minnesota. He had as his players a group of kids who were 20 and 21 years old. Some had just graduated from college, and some were still in college. They were an undisciplined group, and he was a very strict taskmaster, and they hated him. He was a very difficult person for them to deal with. He worked them very, very hard. But he made them into a good team. However, they played the Russians in an exhibition in New York City, Madison Square Garden, 2 weeks before the Olympics, and they were beaten 10-3. And that was actually a respectable showing. A 10-3 loss to that Russian team was a good night on the ice. No one felt particularly surprised. No one felt disappointed. They couldn't expect to do better. I think, did they play Sweden that year? They may have played Sweden, I'm not sure. But they did play a Nordic country. They did surprisingly well in the early rounds, and they met the Russians in the semifinal. I think they beat Finland in the final. They met the Russians in the semifinal. The odds of the Americans winning in this David and Goliath battle against this experienced professional, really professional hockey team, when they were a bunch of college kids, seemed so low as to be ridiculous. Herb Brooks in the locker room said something like this: "This is your moment. A moment like this very rarely comes in your life. And this is one chance you have to seize your moment. You've worked very hard up until this point. You've done everything that could possibly be asked of you. This is your moment. If we played, I can try now. If we played the Russians 10 times, they would beat us 9 times. But not this time. Not this night. This night we skate with them. This night we're the greatest hockey team in the world. And it was amazing. They fell behind. Everyone expected the Russians would run up the score, as they always could run up the score against the American team. The American team hung in, tied the game up, which was a miracle in itself. And then, with very little time left on the clock, they scored a goal. Now, I'm not a patriotic American, so I'm not telling this story because this is a wonderful moment in American history. I'm very aware of all the reasons not to be a patriotic American. I'm telling you because it's a wonderful moment in human nature. That this group of kids was able to overcome the odds. And then as the clock ran down, no one believed that they could win. They thought there would be a last-minute heroic Russian comeback. As the clock ran down to 0, the announcer, he's still an announcer. This happened 38 years ago. He still announces. He said, "Do you believe in miracles?" And that to me is a very telling, with all of the pettiness, with all of the negative aspects of human nature, the selfishness, the inability to be altruistic. This country, if any country, demonstrates the opposite. Demonstrates, you went from being the terror of 1,000 years ago to being the most rational country in the world. And if any country can solve the miracle of developing guidelines that would include cooperatively the various professions, that would include the parents, that would include the teachers, that would include the kids, that would provide an opportunity for the very best in care that mankind can offer for ADHD at this moment, it would be this country. And the only thing you have to do is do it. So the next step. The next step really is to figure out a way to unify your interests more, and then to unify in order to influence the politicians, the people who develop the policies, and to try to figure out the optimal way to do this and be a model for the rest of the world, so that people come to the Swedish guidelines and say, this is the way we want to do it. Thank you very much.
The questions for the Common 3 seminar to all of you. So, can everyone who has participated today come up on the stage, please? I want to say thank you, Alan, for coming here again to Sweden. We are so grateful for having you here today. And I want to say thank you to all others participating here. And we want to say thank you to the topic here. Everyone here has done this day together. We are in let's say this is Sweden, okay? I Integrativ Medicin så har vi många olika professionella yrken representerade. Och jag tror i alla fall, vi får säga, vi har en hel radda här med, från läkarna i Integrativ Medicin, är att vi har en systemisk förståelse, ska man väl säga, för människan och allting som handlar om människan. Ett spill, tack för det. Så är det. Så det är det som då förbinder det oss, och vi kan jobba tillsammans för att vi behövs allihopa på vår produktion. So, thank you. We have some gifts, and the gifts is from Jenny. She has her own farm. She's very interested in quality food, and here's some quality food for everyone in the participating here. Maybe Jenny, you can come and tell us what you have in the presents.
Det är mikrofon. You will have some carefully extracted honey from our bees that they have made, and some sourdough bread, and then you will have kefir grains. And kefir grains, there's also a folder so that you can cultivate these grains because they grow when they are fermenting milk, for example. And it's a very healthy beverage. So, and they grow, so the whole idea is that you pass them on to somebody else as they grow.
And I want to say thank you, Nora, and thank you, Fanny, for what you have done for this day. Thank you.